back. This is Sober Now. I'm Jim LaPierre. Today's topic is dealing with cravings and compulsions in recovery. As always, would love to hear your questions and comments. Please feel free to message in on any of the streams that we have going today. And if you haven't yet been over to Sober Now's Facebook page, please check that out. Drop us a like. You'll get notified about future live streams and other content that we create. All right, let's get into it. So, triggers, cravings, compulsions, these are all natural, frequent parts of early recovery. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything is wrong per se. It just means that we have to be paying attention, noticing what's going on within ourselves. This is a hard habit to develop because it's not what we're used to. What we're used to is avoiding or ignoring ourselves, white-knuckling our way through things. And I think too often we see having cravings or a compulsion to use as a sign that we're going backwards. Too often we think about recovery as this linear thing that is either going forwards or back, and it's really not like that. Some of the folks I've known with the greatest recoveries have said to me, that there's nothing more natural than for an alcoholic to think about drinking, or for a drug addict to think about getting high. Even with long-term abstinence, we sometimes find ourselves having those cravings, experiencing those compulsions, or engaging in a lot of obsessive thinking, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. So, I think all of these things are clearly an opportunity to examine where are we at, what's going on with us, but don't overthink it. Consider what are the things that have been helpful to you in your pathway to recovery. Are you doing those things right now? Who do you need to involve in this process? I think the key to dealing with cravings is to think them through and come to a decision, a conscious choice. Pushing these thoughts away is like throwing a boomerang. It's just going to come back. It's going to hit you harder, and it's probably going to knock you down. So the example that I often use is it's a hot day and your brain tells you, a cold beer would taste great today. So notice that thought and think about the truth of what would happen. Follow it through. Okay, first of all, have I ever had just one? Notice all the notice all the lies that the disease tells you and expose them. One of the best and simplest things we can do is just take a minute and tell somebody who supports us, somebody who holds us accountable for our recovery, and just say to them, hey, here's what my disease is telling me today. Here's what's going on with me, and don't fight this alone is the bottom line. We lose battles that we fight with self, and just by involving somebody else in the process, even just taking a few seconds and texting relapse leads back to regular drinking, and my life will be a mess in no time at all. So some real simple things to put into practice. The first one is mindfulness, which is a nice term that therapists use, which means, hey, you got to freaking pay attention to yourself. Practice some rigorous honesty. This is an ideal that the literature of AA prescribes. I think in life in general, it's really just an ideal. I think we're always going to struggle to some degree with not telling people what they want to hear, not telling those little white lies. But when it comes to self, first of all, you're never going to find anything in this life worth lying to yourself about. And secondly, it'll make your life increasingly unmanageable. We have to be moving in a direction of being able to trust ourselves in order for our lives to be healthy, in order for them to be manageable. It's totally cool to distract yourself and to stay busy, but I think it's better to first think things through, make a conscious choice, and involve other people in the process. A huge part of relapse prevention, those plans need to be in place as quickly and as readily as possible. They have to be realistic in order to be effective, and there's a couple of vital aspects that I want to touch on here. The first one is that we tend to wait too long. In recovery, we tend to have this underlying belief of just about everything bad, everything stressful, sad, scary, doesn't matter. Anything we don't want, deep down, we believe that if we ignore it long enough, it'll go away. And of course, that never, ever, ever happens. The only two things that I found that will go away if you ignore them long enough are teeth and good people. So don't wait too long. Don't fight it alone. And then the second aspect of relapse prevention is, I hear this from people all the time. I have people that are there if I need them. Well, okay, don't wait until you need them. Because the longer you go without talking to them, the more awkward it's going to be when you need to reach out to them. We are people who need people. If I don't have fellowship, if I don't have people in my life that are holding me accountable, I'm going to be sunk, even if, whether I drink or not, whether I drug or not, whether I do other things that are unhealthy. If I stay isolated, it's only a matter of time until things are going to be going really badly. I encourage folks to consider that there are many different types of compulsions, obsessions, and triggers. But I want to break them down into two simple categories. The first one is everything that's related to substance use disorder, and the second one is everything that's related to our mental health, and specifically to the trauma that most of us find resurfacing, especially in early recovery. Both of those put us in harm's way, but I caution folks all the time, because we have a tendency to pathologize ourselves. We come up with all kinds of bad ideas about what's really going on with us. I think we need to have a long period of abstinence or harm reduction or MAT or whatever your pathway is before we can really get a sense of what's going on with a person's mental health. It's almost something that I assume. If a person's in recovery, they probably have a trauma history, and chances are they experienced trauma before they ever started using. Once we start using drugs or alcohol to cope with how we feel, or to numb ourselves, or to block out memories, we arrest our emotional development, and that's why so many of us feel like scared little kids in overgrown bodies. So we're going to separate these just for a moment, and if we say that there's triggers for substance use disorder and triggers for mental health or trauma, the simple approach is we have to deal with substance use disorder first, foremost, always. Because if we go back to using, then obviously we're not going to be making any gains in overcoming mental illness or dealing with trauma. We need to have stability, safety, and security. We need our basic life needs to be met. We need to be building from a foundation that's solid. So first, foremost, and always, don't use no matter what. My friends in NA have a lot of different applications for the no matter what expression. Don't use no matter what. I love you no matter what. And I have always found that to be not only really useful, but also really super empowering. When we get looking real close at obsessions and compulsions, there's a million things that I would love to have $1 for every time I've heard it as a therapist. I've had hundreds of people over the years diagnose themselves with a whole lot of conditions that they don't have. But one of the most common is people tell me that they have OCD. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. It is an anxiety disorder, and I think that's the most important thing to take note of here. Having anxiety in early recovery is normal. You're supposed to have anxiety in the first year or two of recovery. You're changing your whole life. You're learning an enormous amount. You're implementing things. You're facing the wreckage of your past. It makes perfect sense that you would be anxious. We're learning how to live a new life. And even in long-term recovery, anxiety disorders are very common, or just to feel anxious is a daily occurrence for a lot of us. So we need to come to view those as opportunities for further healing and a reason to seek outside help. Most of us, again, are survivors of childhood abuse. We're survivors of sexual assault, of a whole lot of things that people sadly don't talk nearly enough about. And of course, the places that active addiction took us often involve other experiences and forms of trauma. So when our past gets triggered, the craving almost immediately follows because, again, we want to numb that pain, we want to block those memories. Um, the biggest mistake we can make is analyzing ourselves. I cringe every time somebody tells me that they're going to try to figure it out. Figuring it out is something you do inside your head, typically alone, and this is still a warehouse for bad ideas, right? It's not something that I want to analyze. I love the expression that analysis leads to paralysis. It's not really important to think about the why. It's not really important to think about where is this coming from. It's not helpful to try to make sense of things. The first thing is don't use no matter what. The second thing is coping. What is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I need? Keep it real simple. Again, we don't want to fight these losing battles for control, so the first thing we want to do is recognize that our disease wants us hurt, scared, lonely, angry. The disease will use absolutely anything that it can get its hands on, and so whether that's depression, anxiety, past trauma, whatever it is, our disease is going to throw fuel on that fire. So coping is the first go-to. I always encourage folks to consider you don't do your best thinking when you're scared. You don't make good plans when you're overwhelmed. So what my go-tos are, grounding skills especially, deep breathing skills, looking for tension in your body and releasing it. These are ways of slowing down your heartbeat, taking back control of your physical self. Safety and self-control begin with the body. And for most of us, the most terrifying and painful experiences of our lives came when we didn't have control of our bodies or when that was taken away from us. You've probably seen a meme at some point about grounding skills. The idea is to find 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Grounding skills help us get back to the present, back to the here and now. When we're triggered, we're typically somewhere in our past. We might be experiencing some anxiety about the future. We might be anticipating things, and none of that is manageable, right? The recovery expression of taking things one day at a time is really applicable here. Having a sense of healthy self-control, having a sense of I have people or a program or something that I can lean on. I don't have to do this alone. All of these are vital to our serenity, to our health, and to ensuring that we don't relapse or return to use. Think about it in terms of if somebody that you care about was going through this, how much support would you want them to have? We have a tendency to view ourselves differently than we view others. We have a tendency to deny ourselves very basic things that we need and deserve. And one of the things that we often lose sight of is that it helps the people who support us to help us. When we feel unworthy, when we are struggling, we tend to withdraw, and we tend to tell ourselves a whole lot of beautiful lies about how I'll reach out later, I'll reach out after work, I'll reach out when I'm feeling better, which is something I hear a lot, and unfortunately it says volumes about how we've been conditioned to maintain appearances, how we're afraid of vulnerability, how difficult it is for us to open up and share what's going on with us. But again, if it was somebody you cared about, you wouldn't want them to be going through this alone. You'd want them to have a lot of active support, and you'd know that trying to stay clean and sober alone is unmanageable and unhealthy. Gonna pause and check the streams real quick. Would love to hear from you. How are things going with you today? Are there things maybe not on topic, but stuff you'd like to discuss? I'm happy to answer questions. Whoops. Okay. All right. Thanks for folks that are watching the stream. And if you're watching the stream long after the fact, please drop me a comment. Let me know how things are going on with you today. Always love being a resource. I'm going to talk a little bit more about obsession, because my experience is that obsessive and circular thinking is obviously very common for us. And I've learned a great deal about obsessive thinking. What I've come to is that it is most often avoidance. We have a tendency to hyper-focus on the minutiae, on the surface, on little things that are superficial and not important. We have a tendency to seek control in our environments, sometimes over other people. We have a tendency to try and force outcomes. And all of this leads to a whole lot of energy that's very nervous and worried and anxious in nature. And so our thoughts become circular, and this is where the hamster wheel kicks in. This is where we start overthinking things and complicating things. I'm a big believer of the keep it simple system. Most everything that I've encountered in life is actually pretty easy to understand. People are not complicated. Even when they may have a lot of things going on, they might be multidimensional, there might be a lot of things that we have to attend to, but that doesn't make it complicated. We complicate people, places, and things because we don't like how they feel, because they require something of us, because we don't want to face the responsibility of change. There's a lot of reasons why we do this, but I think the bottom line is, if you're going 100 miles an hour, if you're squirrely, if you're finding it difficult to focus, it's best to practice the recovery skill of taking pause. Take a step back, take some deep breaths, and think about, who should I be involving in this process? Ask yourself, how am I doing emotionally? Ask yourself, what am I doing? Quite literally. And if you practice some rigorous honesty, when you ask yourself, what am I doing? The answer is going to be something like, I'm worried about things that are outside of my control. I'm anticipating that things that happened in my past are going to continue to happen. There's all types of unhealthy things that we engage in, but we tend to do them subconsciously. No one ever says to themselves, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes telling myself what a loser I am because of past choices or mistakes that I've made. But we do those kind of things all the time. So getting back into today, doing things that slow the hamster wheel down. One of the greatest strategies for that is journaling. Put it on paper, put it on a computer screen. It looks very different when you bring it out into the open, and we'll find some opportunities. It has a natural ability to slow down circular thinking, because so much of what we're thinking is repetitive, and so when we write it down or type it out, it provides a small amount of relief, and we can notice, okay, I keep coming back to this. Maybe there's an opportunity there to get yourself more organized, but there's always an opportunity there to cope. And just take a few minutes. What is it that I need? What is it that I'm feeling? And again, who can I involve in that process? Don't do this alone. Notice that a lot of the things that we tend to be obsessive and compulsive about are things that are opportunities. They're areas for growth. They're probably things that require some spiritual growth. The expression of surrendering to win comes to mind. Being able to let go and trust that my higher power is going to take care of the things that I can't. It's something that I struggled with for a lot of years. But I reconciled it by noticing that whether I trust my higher power to take care of these things or not, I still can't do a damn thing about them. So I quite literally have nothing to lose. Notice the times where you're seeking control. Control tends to be, or the desire for control tends to be, one of our biggest character defects. But what that's really about is being afraid. Fear makes us want greater amounts of control. And so these are the times that we're likely to manipulate. These are the times where we're likely to be less than honest. And if we can simply acknowledge that we're afraid and consider how it is that we will cope with that, how it is that we will make decisions despite that. I'm convinced that how a person deals with fear determines the lion's share of what's possible in their lives. So what we did in the past with fear was we ignored it, which meant that it built up and it took a toll on us. I often say to people, fears are specific, but anxiety is general. When we don't deal with the things that we're afraid of, we develop increasing amounts of anxiety, and we become worried about things that maybe don't even matter, maybe aren't even important. And of course, the biggest way that we dealt with fear was by drinking or drugging. And so I don't need to do that today. I need to be able to tell at least one person, here's what's really going on with me, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I need, and give me some feedback, give me some input, give me some reassurance, give me a hug. These are very practical strategies for moving out of that space and towards greater safety. I'm fond of the expression surrender to win because it allows me to cease this battle that I have with myself, and it allows me to connect with others. It allows me to move away from all of these ideas about how important it is to be independent and move towards being interdependent. Everybody talks about codependency and independence, but very few of us talk about being interdependent. To be interdependent is to be someone who can rely on themselves and makes the choice to rely on others who are kindred spirits, who are moving in similar directions and towards greater health. I think the most important piece of dealing with the obsessive and compulsive, what is really the addictive mind, is to ensure that we're not being complacent. Typically, when people relapse, we most often find that they had stopped doing a great many things that were healthy for them, a great many things that had helped them to attain sobriety, attain being clean, and stay sober and stay clean. So check in with yourself and with your coach, your counselor, the folks that hold you accountable. Are you doing your due diligence? Are you maybe plateaued? That's a term that, again, only a therapist would use. Therapists, for some reason, love the analogy of mountain climbing. So as we get better, we're climbing this mountain. Reaching a plateau means that you've made a lot of progress. You've come to a place where you have a greater understanding or a greater ability to cope. Things have improved. And it's really important to notice that, actually, and to celebrate those gains. And then, of course, we keep climbing. If we stay on the plateau, that's what complacency is. We've said, okay, I'm not really willing to go any further. I'm not willing to make further investments, and that's when we put ourselves at risk. And that's something that's going to feed obsessive thinking and compulsive behavior. It's something that's gradually going to alienate us and take us away from everything that helped us find recovery in the first place. So, going to be wrapping up in just a moment. As always, I would love to hear from you. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to do that. Message me your questions, your ideas. I would love to hear topics that you'd like to see covered in future talks. We're typically here every Thursday, noontime Eastern, and always welcome connection with you. A few resources to share. Check out Sober Now's YouTube channel. About 170 videos there now, completely free. Different aspects of addiction recovery, live streams, a lot of different content there, and a great resource to share. And of course, please check out our website, sobernow.com. Now on a subscription service, eminently affordable. We're under $15 a month, and that gets you access to our home study programs, which are completely confidential and based in anonymity. Go at your own pace. Learn things that are going to fortify, support your recovery from substance use disorder. And of course, our second program is for people like me, for affected others who have loved ones in active addiction. Learning how to cope with one of the most stressful things that a family can go through and how we best support each other through that. As always, I'm hoping that you're taking excellent care of yourself, and I will look forward to connecting with you again soon.